Hello, thank you for joining today's distinguished lecture with Dr. Nancy Siegel titled An Uphill Climb from Mountaintops to Critical Acclaim, The Artistry of Susie M. Barstow. My name is Nicole Hooks, Manager of Adult Education Programs here at the New Britain Museum of American Art, and it is my pleasure to welcome all of you today. I would like to give a special thank you to the Catharine M. Rogers Lecture Series for today's lecture. There will be time for a few questions at the end of today's lecture. If you would like to ask any questions, please write your questions in the chat field down below. I'm delighted to introduce Dr. Nancy Siegel. Dr. Siegel is a professor of art history and culinary history at Townsend University and specializes in American landscape studies, underrepresented women artists of the 19th century, print culture, and culinary history of the 18th and 19th centuries. Her most recent book, Susie M. Barstow, Redefining the Hudson River School, complements the 2023 touring exhibition she co-curated, Women Reframe American Landscapes, Susie Barstow and Her Circle of Contemporary Practices. This exhibit builds upon her 2010 exhibition, Remember the Ladies, Women of the Hudson River School. Nancy is currently completing the manuscript Political Appetite, Revolution, Taste, and Culinary Activism in the Early Republic while providing historical cooking demonstrations and lecturing widely on landscape and culinary histories. Now I'm happy to turn this program over to our distinguished guest.
Great, Nicole, thank you so much. It's an absolute pleasure to be here with you today as we celebrate Women's History Month and the exhibition here at the New Britain Museum of American Art, Women Reframe American Landscape. I am particularly grateful to Lisa Williams and Stephanie Height for their curatorial vision, Keith Gervais for his wonderful installation, your director, Brett Abbott, for his leadership, and of course, the staff, particularly Lisa and Nicole, for hosting and facilitating this lecture. I would also like to thank my wonderful partners from the Thomas Cole National Historic Site, Kate Mancaneri and Amanda Melstrom, with whom I was honored to spend time considering the language, the artists, and the creative processes of myriad women who engage with land and landscape. We were absolutely thrilled to bring this exhibition to New Britain. This afternoon, I'd like to bring your attention to an important artist of the Hudson River School, Susie Barstow. Recognized for her artistry and achieving great fame in her day, Barstow was all but written out of modern history. It is now the subject of a monographic study, Susie M. Barstow, Redefining the Hudson River School, excuse my shameless self-plug, in addition to her first retrospective that was originally conceived as a two-part exhibition, Women Reframe American Landscape, Susie Barstow and Her Circle, and Contemporary Practices, which opened at the Thomas Cole National Historic Site in Catskill, New York in May of 2023, and is currently on view at the New Britain Museum of American Art until March 31st, before the show travels to the Woodson Museum in Wausau, Wisconsin in May. Barstow has been situated among a number of her female colleagues as seen in these installation shots from the Cole site, and reimagined in the galleries in New Britain, which made for a visually enchanting installation. By way of context, in 2010, I curated the show Remember the Ladies, Women of the Hudson River School with Jennifer Krieger, the first exhibition devoted exclusively to these 19th century artists. Since that time, there has been tremendous interest in these women from scholars, collectors, and museums. It remains important that we continue to expand our definition of the Hudson River School with greater inclusivity, since for almost 2 centuries, Thomas Cole, the founding father of the first American school of painting, as he is often labeled, has come to personify the Hudson River School. But what about the founding mothers? Recent scholarship has provided us with an increased awareness of the breadth and depth of numerous artists who, like Cole, explored and painted the American landscape from the 1820s to the end of the 19th century. In fact, by the middle decades of the century, increasing numbers of women not only aspired to paint professionally, but also achieved personal and financial success as artists, resulting in part from broader educational curricula, the instruction they acquired at home and abroad, and passionate determination to experience nature's wonderland directly. Among the professional landscape painters at mid-century who hiked, sketched, and exhibited their work were the artists Julie Hart Beers, Sarah Cole, Charlotte Buell Coleman, Eliza Greatorex, Mary Josephine Walters, and Laura Woodward. A common thread uniting them was Susie Barstow, whose landscape showcased picturesque qualities, a romantic sensibility, and well-balanced compositions, earning her fame and prominence in her day. Barstow and her female colleagues, painting in the style of the Hudson River School, routinely traveled to immerse themselves in American scenery. They wrote poetically of their adventures and captured on canvas the beauty and awe they encountered out of doors, inspired by the landscape, just as Thomas Cole, Asher Durand, and Frederick Church, the male canon of the Hudson River School. These 19th century women artists, including Barstow, shared not only a deep engagement with the themes of American land and the natural world, but also an assertion of their place within an art world that all too often failed to offer the same opportunities and visibility to female artists as their male counterparts. Working en plein air or from the comfort of their studios, Barstow and her circle consistently exhibited and sold their paintings competitively in the most prestigious academies and galleries of New York. The professionalization of their careers situates these women among the many whose lives and creative practices necessitate a redefinition of who and what the Hudson River School was and is. In recognition of the 100th anniversary of Susie Barstow's death, which occurred in 1923, I'd like to take you on a deep dive into her art and life. Susie Moore Barstow, was born on May 9th, 1836 to Mary and Samuel Barstow, a well-established tea merchant in Lower Manhattan. Named after her paternal grandmother, Susie, the middle child, lived with her siblings, Anne and Elijah, in a series of brownstone buildings owned by their father in Brooklyn, New York. After attending the Rutgers Female Institute in 1853 and the Cooper Union in 1861, Barstow began exhibiting her work in her 20s and joined the important art organizations of her day, such as the Cosmopolitan Art Association. Throughout her long career, Barstow maintained a number of studios in Brooklyn that were certainly well known to many. One in particular was characterized as Miss Barstow's, quote, dainty little studio. Barstow frequented the Catskills, the Adirondacks, the White Mountains, and the lakes and mountains of Maine for inspiration. She made multiple excursions abroad to study art in Britain, Germany, Switzerland, and Italy, as well as a trip around the world in 1901 to Japan, China, India, and Egypt with her partner, Florence Nightingale Fallon, a fellow artist with whom she frequently lived and traveled for nearly 2 decades. Susie was also an inveterate hiker. The 1889 issue of the White Mountain Echo noted that Barstow had climbed up to 110 peaks, including, quote, all the principal peaks of the Catskills, Adirondacks, and White Mountains, as well as those of the Alps, Tyrol, and Black Forest, often tramping 25 miles a day and sketching as well, often in the midst of a blinding snowstorm, end quote. The Brooklyn Daily Eagle repeatedly characterized Barstow as one of the best-known Brooklyn artists. And when she died on June 12th, 1923, at the age of 87, she was described in her obituary as a, quote, prominent landscape artist whose paintings won her wide renown, and as a woman of keen intellectual attainments. Barstow taught, traveled with female students to give them instruction en plein air in the northeastern landscape. And she advocated for progressive ideas such as women's suffrage and access to study the male nude model as part of a woman's academic training. Barstow was on the earliest committees for the establishment of the Brooklyn Museum of Art and was a well-respected member of the faculty at the Brooklyn Institute. She donated work to support the efforts of the Sanitary Commission during the Civil War and again to the American Red Cross during the First World War. As a professional artist, she exhibited at major venues alongside male colleagues and realized comparable prices for her paintings. Furthermore, she commanded the physical landscape of the Hudson Valley, the White Mountains, and the rigorous terrain of Yosemite, the Alps, actually any mountain range he encountered that offered stunning vistas and marvelous views, all the while altering her long skirts and hiking garb so as not to be encumbered on these rugged explorations. Susie Barstow was undaunted. Well-read, well-educated, and well-traveled, Barstow was a notable figure in the field of American landscape painting. A darling of the New York press, she was interviewed often. She published her ideas about the value of experiencing nature directly and lectured widely on the topic. In a lecture on the American landscape, Susie recalled details from a visit to the Catskill Mountains. Quote, "When I was a child, I visited the Catskill Mountains. As we saw them from the river on a hazy summer afternoon, they lay like a delicate cloud, so delicate and dreamlike that it seemed as if a breath would blow them away. I hardly dared to look away from them, fearing they might vanish. As we approached, their forms became more distinct, but always vapory and unreal, seeming to belong to another world than the river and its wooden shores and villages." Barstow felt incredibly at home in the woods or in the mountains or by the lakes and ponds and rivers that she explored. In a recently discovered letter, Barstow included a sketch of a dead tree with a rickety ladder that she and her female hikers climbed to witness Catskill High Peak. Unfazed by the potential perils of falling to the ground, Barstow wrote, "I found it easier than I expected, and when I reached the top was repaid by a magnificent view all around." The early style of Barstow's paintings can be characterized as that of the Hudson River School: romanticized, site-specific compositions, and secluded depictions of nature's beauty. Barstow's paintings, however, are not the grandiose panoramic visions of Thomas Cole, Asher Durand, and Frederick Church, which reflected the art market from the 1830s to the 1850s. Theirs was a time of great exploration and nationalism, marked by a quest to situate the deity well within the American landscape, a time when wealthy men were compelled to purchase the largest canvases possible in an attempt to rival the European tradition of art and patronage. Barstow and fellow artists, including Jervis McEntee, Julie Hart Beers, and John William Casaleer, for example, were part of the second wave of the Hudson River School, an era after the Civil War in which Reconstruction and economic growth fueled the art market, spurring increased demand for smaller, intimate scenes of the American landscape. Artists such as Barstow responded enthusiastically to this call for parlor-sized compositions from a new and vibrant middle class of collectors who were eager to adorn their walls with scenes of the Catskills and the Green and White Mountains. With their unspoiled rivers, lakes, streams, and wooded scenery, landscape as it still existed, seemingly untouched by progress or war, reflecting a nostalgic taste for a more peaceful past. The prime of Barstow's career occurred between the 1870s and the end of the 19th century. Artistically, a span of time in which scholars have claimed that the Hudson River School had fallen out of fashion, with more avant-garde European influences being favored. Barstow, however, understood popular taste, and her painterly style evolved continuously across the 19th century. She took copious notes on John Ruskin's philosophies regarding the truthful depiction of nature, and her studies demonstrate her knowledge of both Ruskin and the pre-Raphaelite penchant for precise botanical forms. Likewise, Barstow's maturing style evokes the influence of Barbizon artists, such as Jean-Baptiste Camille Corot and Charles-François d'Aubigny. Their direct observation was complemented with softer lines, sentiment, and more diffuse forms. Exploring changes in atmospheric conditions, these French artists produced immersive landscapes, moody and romantic compositions that capitalized on a spiritual communing with nature. Barstow was enormously influenced by their work, and by the paintings of Corot in particular. She kept newspaper clippings of his studio methods in her paint box, which was filled with supplies that included camel hair brushes, porcelain palettes, watercolors, and heavily leaded white flake pigment. Barstow witnessed the rise and decline of the American Art Union and the financial distress of the National Academy of Design in the mid-1870s. She viewed the transcendent works of Martin Johnson Heade and Fitzhenry Lane and the veiled feminism of Lily Martin Spencer. Barstow would come to understand the tenets of manifest destiny and exhibited her work alongside Western landscape scenes by Albert Bierstadt. She herself traveled to Yosemite at the turn of the 20th century. Born during the infancy of photography, Barstow saw its many technological advances that gave rise to a redefinition of realism: optical, social, and emotional. The photographic exposés of Jacob Riis, for example, were in line with her own commitment to social justice and charitable causes. Barstow's exhibition history took place on both sides of the East River, just as John Roebling was spanning the divide between Brooklyn and Manhattan with his Brooklyn Bridge, making for easier travel between the two boroughs. Susie experienced the age of the skyscraper, an American architectural invention that rivaled the heights of mountaintops, forever changing the skyline of the urban landscape. She knew the paintings of Thomas Eakins, Winslow Homer, George Inness, and John Singer Sargent, exhibiting with many of them, and attended lectures by William Merritt Chase, who clearly influenced her ever-evolving style. Having lived for 87 years, a lifetime spanning 2 centuries, Susie Barstow witnessed a vast array of political upheaval, scientific advances, cultural events, celebrations, and American progress defined broadly as part of a changing world. As a young woman, she lived through the Civil War and later the First World War. She benefited from the development of pasteurization, the washing machine and the sewing machine, and watched as New York streets converted from the horse and carriage to trolleys and then to the automobile. She experienced the shift from the telegraph to the telephone and Edison's invention of the phonograph and the electric light bulb. Barstow attended Chicago's Columbian Exposition in 1893, making watercolor sketches and saving her entrance tickets as souvenirs. She observed the myriad means by which motion and sound advanced in exciting ways: the roller coaster at Coney Island, the Wright brothers' first flight at Kitty Hawk, the escalator, and talking motion pictures. The Museum of Natural History, the Metropolitan Museum of Art, the New York Public Library, and the Brooklyn Museum of Art were all created during Susie's lifetime. And of great importance, Barstow lived long enough to celebrate the ratification of the 19th Amendment on August 18, 1920, which gave women the constitutional right to vote. What an incredible time in which to live and paint. Barstow was ever curious to educate herself in both traditional and avant-garde artistic movements, while always adhering to her passion for direct observations and experiences within nature. This resulted in paintings that were praised, exhibited, and purchased throughout her extensive career, demonstrating her ability to commingle conservative and progressive styles popular with the American public. As an artist of determination and determined independence with a passion for exploration, Barstow often left her traveling companions to hike and sketch on her own. She enjoyed continuous bouts of wanderlust, using her Brooklyn home and studio as a place to unpack, paint, visit with family, entertain friends in her charismatic, witty manner, and then take off for new adventures. Whether traveling alone, with friends, or sometimes with her students, to places of immense beauty to study, sketch, and commune, it was not uncommon for Susie to hike 8, 10, or 12 miles, only then to sit down and commence with the task at hand, to capture in detailed studies on paper or canvas the wondrous charm she experienced out of doors, inspired by the natural landscape. So too was Susie guided by her Christian faith. Her love of nature and love of deity fit hand in glove with the romantic sensibilities of landscape theories from the early to mid-19th century. Like many of her female artistic colleagues, she was a supporter of numerous philanthropic causes, and as was expected of a well-educated woman in New York. Henry Ward Beecher, the famed preacher, abolitionist, and ally of women's suffrage, was an avid art collector and would come to purchase work by Barstow. With respect to her gender, she defied numerous social, educational, and professional expectations. But irrespective of her gender, Susie Barstow was a markedly successful artist whose acclaim and talent did not go unnoticed. In her day, she was recognized continuously in the press as an important artist, exhibited with her colleagues Asher Durand, John Frederick Kensett, Sanford Gifford, Jervis McEntee, and Thomas Moran. Barstow's early work suggests the influence of first-generation artists such as Cole and Durand, while her mid-career style sparks comparisons to McEntee, with whom she hiked along the Hudson. Her studies of waterfalls and mountain views are breathtaking for their atmospheric accuracy and timeless appeal. Barstow maintained a profound ability to command the rugged beauty of nature as found in the American landscape. Hiking and sketching in the Catskills and the White Mountains filled her days, months, and years. She was drawn to climb peaks and explore valleys as part of her ever curious and passionate determination to become the best painter possible. While Susie was documenting wondrous sights from her excursions, the Northeast, from the Catskills to the mountainous areas of New England and Upton, Maine, had become a tourist destination, and Susie was eager to partake. Travel afforded women in particular freedom of mind, body, and spirit. Dorothy Militant explained in Victorian Lady Travelers, quote, clothed in long skirts and armed with an umbrella or sunshade according to the climate, the 19th century woman traveler covered thousands of miles, writing, painting, observing, botanizing, missionizing, collecting, and latterly photographing. In fact, by the 1880s, multitudes of women were climbing, hiking, riding bicycles, and exercising more than just their minds. Numerous publications aimed precisely at the lady traveler, instructed her on how best to make arrangements, what to bring, what to wear, where to eat, how to find lodging, whom to avoid, whom to seek out, and so on. For the emancipated woman of the latter half of the 19th century, assistance was a mere turn of a page away. Meanwhile, in the Catskills and White Mountains, fences were erected, paths were laid, and maps drawn. Hotels were built, providing all the comforts of home, plus excursions, lawn tennis, and cocktail hours. Guidebooks were published annually, offering descriptive advice on important and interesting sites to explore, as well as providing clothing recommendations for both men and women. Susie would travel to the Catskills for decades, as it was one of her favorite locations, in which to hike and sketch, and her adventures were well noted in the press. With regard to the clothing associated with hiking and climbing, Barstow would have to contend with petticoats, bustles, corsets, and crinolines. Over the course of her lengthy career, she witnessed astounding changes in women's bust lines, waistlines, and hemlines. From the 1850s to the early 20th century, health reformers, progressives, and women's rights advocates would have much to say about femininity, idealized forms, and freedom from costume restraints. Barstow's choices in fashion greatly impacted her ability to hike and climb with greater ease. In fact, her timing was ideal. As she was beginning to venture forth in the 1850s, advocates for women's health had begun to praise increased exercise out of doors. This prompted reformers such as Amelia Bloomer to popularize the trouser, or bloomer, to be worn with a short skirt for easier movement during calisthenics, despite the ire from certain men and women who equated, quote, dressing male with a threat to womanhood and femininity. Bloomers of the 1850s became part of a broader undergarment reform of the 1860s after the Civil War. In fact, by the 1870s, the Yosemite costume was advertised with its pantaloons under a short skirt, demonstrating that artists who traveled to this site of natural wonder, such as Eliza Greatorex and Barstow, had access to a variety of clothing options. Long, heavy skirts, petticoats, stockings, uncomfortable heels, and layers of binding undergarments hindered mobility for women hikers. But shorter skirts, trousers instead of petticoats, and the new emancipation waist, a sleeveless vest with a snug fit to the bodice and a row of buttons below the waist to attach petticoats and skirts, offered numerous choices for greater comfort and safer navigation of rocky terrain. In 1877, Mrs. W.G. Nowell wrote Mountain Suits for Women for Appalachia, a journal created by the Appalachian Mountain Club to which Barstow belonged, in which Nowell advocated for shorter walking skirts. She writes, "During the past few years, ladies who are fond of pedestrian tours have found that their ordinary street costume is not adapted to country roads. To make themselves more comfortable, many now wear a plain, untrimmed skirt, a few inches shorter than the regular street dress. They fasten this to a blouse waist, thus letting the shoulders carry the burden, which they make as light as possible. This is very well, and if worn with proper underclothing, is all that is needed for road walking." When hard climbing was to be considered, Nowell suggested appropriate footwear, noting, quote, "Some ladies have worn boys' canvas baseball shoes with much comfort, and a climbing suit made of stout flannel." Although most women opted for traditional fashion, the rational dress movement was built on the premise of comfort, ease, better hygiene, and overall health. Variations and modifications to undergarments were continuously explored to the end of the 19th century and beyond, with many women perhaps making slight modifications, such as shortening one's skirts or applying rings to lift one's hemline when needed. Nowell concluded with regret, "No wonder that gentlemen have been shy in asking us to accompany them in their explorations, for in our ordinary attire we must lag far behind, while they toil on ahead with double burdens, theirs and ours. Our dress has done all the mischief. For years it has kept us away from the glory of the woods and the grandeur of the mountain heights. It is time we should reform." Consider this walking dress worn by Susie Barstow, circa 1870. Visible in this tintype are two layered skirts adorned with pretty trim, with flowers tucked daintily in her waistband. With her hat and long walking stick, Barstow appears the figure of capability and modernity, prepared to traverse any mountainous terrain that might lie ahead. Thusly, when Winslow Homer painted in the mountains in 1877, the large brimmed hats, walking sticks, long coats, and skirts indicate that Homer was clearly captivated by the image of female hikers and duly impressed by their stamina to reach the summit. Climbing costumes varied, but determination and fortitude required of women who traversed the American landscape was unwavering. Exceptionally prolific and an inveterate hiker and traveler, undaunted by barriers of geography or gender, Barstow lived a life that many could envy. She was independent of thought, outspoken with regard to artistic opportunities and education for women, deeply engaged as a woman of faith and a supporter of both social and philanthropic causes. She was, by all accounts, a joyful and energetic figure, and remained relevant in the ever-changing art world of the later 19th and early 20th centuries. Barstow outlived the older guard, Durand, McEntee, Bierstadt. She maintained a genuine love for experiencing the landscape in all its wondrous forms and seasons, and she traveled to the farthest reaches of the world in search of nature's beauty, hoping to find foreign landscapes, quote, "as beautiful as the Catskill woods." Hers was a remarkable life and career. As a teacher, she influenced countless young women artists who undoubtedly saw her as a mentor. Barstow's artistic legacy was well established at the time of her death in 1923. Yet within a mere few decades, her achievement and reputation, along with those of fellow women artists, were written out of history. In an unexplainable moment of art historical amnesia, the works by these artists failed to be included in exhibitions on American landscape, and with very few exceptions, were all but forgotten in catalogs, monographs, and collected essays. The historical bias against their abilities found its way into scholarship well into the 20th century. But who were some of Barstow's colleagues? Beyond their roles as wife, sister, niece, and daughter, these are talented and accomplished landscape artists who deserve increased scholarly attention. Working en plein air or in their studios, they captured on canvas the beauty and awe they experienced out of doors. They exhibited their work at the National Academy of Design, the Pennsylvania Academy of the Fine Arts, and the Boston Athenaeum, to name but a few of the prestigious venues in which their work was shown annually. All of the works that I will show you now are part of Women Reframe American Landscape. If you have a chance to, please do visit. Julie Hart Beers began her artistic career studying with her brothers, James McDougall Hart and William Hart. She spent a great deal of time hiking and sketching in the Catskill, Adirondack, and White Mountains. An accomplished painter, she took her students to sketch directly from nature, much as Barstow did. Scenic landscape of the Catskills provides a bucolic summer's day, anchored on the right by a spreading birch tree, complemented with cattle cooling themselves in the river. Beers's loosening brushstrokes create a scene of languid beauty. Here, the American landscape is on full display. In the manner of fellow artists of this era, the linear crispness of the Hudson River School style blends effortlessly with the more diffuse tonality of Barbizon influences. Similarly, Wooded Stream of 1877 invites the viewer into an intimate, secluded location of peaceful repose. Cattle wander in the meandering stream, which is framed by a bending bough of trees above. The brushwork is tighter than that of the previous composition, but collectively, Beers's landscapes are breathtakingly beautiful and contemplative. With a career just prior to Barstow's success, Sarah Cole, younger sister to Thomas Cole, stands out as an artist of great talent who was instructed in the fine arts, produced paintings and etchings, and exhibited and sold her work through professional venues in the mid-19th century. This view of the Catskill Mountain House, after a version by Thomas, demonstrates Sarah's skill. She often traveled as a single woman via sloops, steamboats, and stagecoaches, which was time-consuming and at times difficult. Sarah often provided Thomas with support and understanding. Their letters often mentioned financial troubles, but Sarah also addressed her brother's concern that he was losing his artistic ability during the summer of 1836, a pivotal time for Cole with respect to his Course of Empire series and the recent death of his patron Luman Reed. Sarah wrote, quote, "In a little while, you will find that the art will return to you, and that you will return to the art with renewed pleasure. The lights and shadows of this life are like the lights and shadows of your own pictures. The one makes the other more beautiful. And although we've had many troubles, we have not found this life all shadows. It has been now a light and then a shadow, then a light, now a shadow. I really think that your fears of losing your art are groundless." Compassionate words from sister to brother, artist to artist. Charlotte Buell Coleman was born in Waterville, New York, married Elijah Coleman, and moved to Iowa City for a life as a frontier wife. But Elijah died within a few years of their marriage, and Charlotte returned to Waterville, embarking on a career as a professional artist. Like Barstow, her style was deeply influenced by the Barbizon artists. Elected an associate member of the National Academy of Design, Coleman remarkably conducted her training, her travels, and her career as a woman almost entirely deaf. Navigating mountain ranges in foreign countries, not to mention the late 19th century art world, quote unquote impaired, right, or challenged by both her gender and her hearing ability. Landscape, circa 1900, with its prevailing tones of blues and greens, demonstrates the pervasive influence of the Barbizon school upon Coleman's style. One can feel the warmth of the sun as if an ethereal veil of air were cast across the canvas. At the age of 80, Coleman asserted that, quote, "age is no barrier to art." She opined, "I see no reason to keep women from working as successfully as men. Except that, as you know, we women are always being called off to do things which no one expects men to do. I believe that home is the place for women except for painters and musicians. If one has a gift like that, she should express herself." Indeed, she did. It was reported over the course of her career, Coleman painted 1,500 canvases. Where are they all now? Eliza Pratt Greatorex took a studio in the Fifth Avenue building, where she likely studied with James and William Hart, and undoubtedly began her friendship with Julie Hart Beers. Greatorex traveled to Rockingham Springs, Virginia, known after the Civil War for its healing mineral springs and baths. Eliza made numerous sketches, etchings, and two oil compositions of this southern vacation destination, including Rock Enon Spring from Sunset Hill. Taken by the scene's stunning verticality, the viewer's eye moves deep into the recesses of nature. The shimmering reflections of light coming from the springs carry one through the framing trees to the dramatic colors of dusk. Greatorex was a prolific exhibitor of her paintings and etchings and was elected an associate member of the National Academy of Design in 1869. Mary Josephine Walters, like Barstow and ostensibly with Barstow at times, traversed the varied terrains of the Adirondacks, northern New Jersey, the White Mountains, and her beloved Catskill Mountains. Her paintings were selected annually from 1864 to 1883 for exhibition at the National Academy of Design, among other venues, where her work sold with great regularity. As for her artistic education, Walters consulted with Asher Durand. In his biography of his father, John Durand stated that of all the pupils who worked with Durand Sr., it was, quote, Miss Josephine Walters, whom he often advised in the pursuit of her studies, end quote. Wooded landscape from the 1870s clearly suggests Durand's influence. In this secluded hideaway, three children find shade from the heat of summer's heat under the spreading boughs of the trees. The light casting off the water's edge from the small lake where their punt, a flat-bottomed boat used to navigate shallow waters, has been stowed, bringing the viewer through the framing tree trunks and crisscrossing branches back to a winding path that ultimately leads to a church steeple barely noticeable in the central distance. Lastly, Laura Woodward frequently exhibited paintings along those of Susie Barstow, Julie Hart Beers, Eliza Greatorex, and Mary Josephine Walters. Woodward's paintings were praised in the press for decades. Looking Up Keene Valley Adirondacks has all the hallmarks of the Hudson River School at its apex in the 1870s. Partial to the Adirondacks before her move to Florida in the late 1880s, Woodward celebrates the open fields and vast mountain ranges of the East Coast. Cattle on a winding path and a rustic fence on the right are all signs of benign domestication. In portraying a lovely summer day, foliage in bloom, Woodward often dotted her landscapes with hay bales, shafts of wheat, cow, or deer. Landscape paintings of exceptional quality by 19th century women artists such as these are continually coming to light and to market. This painting by an unidentified artist who sits at her easel, painted sketches scattered on the floor behind her, composing a beautiful landscape taken from direct observations of American scenery, serves as a placeholder for research yet to be done. The time is long past due to bring forward the stories of additional accomplished artists to illuminate an expanded history of the Hudson River School. This is their moment. The lives and artistry of Susie Barstow and the women of her circle clearly demonstrate that when Cole Durand and Church ventured into the Catskills, Adirondacks, and White Mountains, they most certainly were not alone. As we bring forward the stories of accomplished women landscape painters of the 19th century, such as Barstow, we must challenge, recast, and expand this definition of the Hudson River School. These women confounded societal and domestic expectations to craft professional lives as artists, as inveterate hikers in the mountains, as businesswomen selling their work, and as exhibitors in the academies. They broke ground, literally, hiking through the Catskill, Adirondack, and White Mountains, and fundamentally serving as stalwart artistic activists, paving the way as the founding mothers of the Hudson River School with messages of perseverance and the uncompromising professionalization of their careers. To conclude with a quote from Susie Barstow when she was just emerging as a young artist, "I will overcome every barrier to success, and soon with the sun rising above every earthly conflict, make myself a name and position that will influence the whole world." Indeed. Thank you very much.
So if you guys haven't already, thank you, Nancy. If you guys haven't written in your questions, you can write your questions into the chat. I do have a few that were sent to me, so I can start with those ones. One question asks, are any of the artist garments preserved at the Cole Center or elsewhere?
Are any of the artists, I'm sorry, what preserved?
Are the artist garments?
Oh, that's a fantastic question. Yes. So let's see. Well, at the Thomas Cole National Historic Site, they have not of the painter, but of Thomas Cole's wife, Mariah. They have her wedding gown there, which is wonderful to see. And it's fascinating to see just how short, how petite a woman she is. There are a number of Barstow garments that are in the family of Barstow descendants. There's a wonderful a fur cape and hat, as well as a dress and some of her shoes. So certainly they exist. And I have to think that in some of these repositories of museums that have larger collections of costume, that some of those still exist. We have a vast number of photographs. Julie Hart Beers, for example, we have wonderful photographs of her in her hiking costumes. Some of those pieces might exist within the family as well. So they're out there for sure.
We have a question that asks, can you explain more about Susie's process? Was she making sketches in the field and making formal oil paintings once back in her studio, or was she painting with the oils in the field?
Yes, that's a fantastic question. Thank you for that. She was an incredible sketcher. So there are numerous sketchbooks that are just filled with these wonderful pencil and also pen and ink drawings that she would take out into nature with her. We also know that she certainly had a portable palette. She would certainly make oil studies on site as well. She was certainly a en plein air painter. She was clearly influenced, right, by the artists of the Barbizon School for sure. So her working process was to take very detailed sketches. In many ways, it's part and parcel to the sketching tradition that we see with people like Thomas Cole from the 1820s and 1830s. So she's very much a part of that tradition, and that's clearly what she learned. And she continues that as well. She also has a number of journals where she writes extensively. She read John Ruskin's work and took copious notes on every chapter. Sort of page after page, she was just digesting what he was explaining and promoting about this truth to nature philosophy. So in many ways, I think she studied as much as she could, she observed as much as she could, and she was continually sketching. I think, her sketchbooks are some of the most fascinating works that we have, and there is a sketchbook we have in the exhibition for sure. Thank you.
This one mentions, as you enter the New Britain Museum, you pass through the first floor filled with male Hudson River School masters on your way upstairs to see Barstow's work on the second floor. What do you think it will take for these female Hudson River School artists to become as well known as their male counterparts?
Fantastic question. In a word, well, multiple words. I'll start with one word, money. It definitely takes money for acquisitions. I think that because we have exhibitions like this. We have, wonderful curators at the New Britain Museum of American Art, at the Thomas Cole National Historic Site, who are so dedicated to promoting the works by these artists, and then by fantastic visitors like yourselves who come to the museum and ask these questions. Where are they? Why aren't there more? Curators, staff, directors, listen to what you have to say. So your input is incredibly important. And the collecting sensibility of major museums is changing tremendously. The Metropolitan Museum of Art just bought their first Julie Hart beers. And let's see, you have you have some beautiful Fidelia bridges in your own collection, which is phenomenal. The Baltimore Museum of Art has been dedicating their collection sensibility to purchasing art just by underrepresented artists, such as by women. So it's a great question. I think it's a combination of scholarship, curatorial eye, collectors, donors, and the public. Right? I think we all play a role in having these works seen on a larger basis. Thank you.
This other question that came in kind of relates to that past question that you just answered. Does the recent popularity impact the prices of the men's paintings?
The recent popularity impacts the prices of the women's paintings tremendously. And yes, the men's paintings as well. So that the market is very hot right now for women of the Hudson River School, and prices have been going through the roof. And I like to think that Susie is looking down from where she is and is very pleased about this. She garnered this very comparable prices in her day as her male colleagues. And so now the prices by these women artists is also comparable with the male artists in a contemporary market. Once anything starts moving within a genre, yes, it has an impact overarchingly. So I think it's good for the market, clearly. I hope that it means, though, that museums are able to competitively bid for these works and keep them in public collections.
Someone asks that many of the paintings in the exhibition are listed in the Barstow Family Trust. Are they ever shown together?
This is the first time that any of these works have ever been shown. I was incredibly fortunate to work with the generosity of descendants of Susie Barstow, who were thrilled about this exhibition. And I will share, they had no idea who their great aunt was. They just thought, wow, this woman could paint, but they didn't know about her career and notoriety. And so I think they had a wonderful time as we worked together. We went through cases and cases of letters and photographs and ephemera and documents. So everything that you see in this exhibition is being shown for the first time of the works from the Barstow family collection. One or two of the others that have come from private collections have been in other exhibitions. So I hope that this is just the beginning, and I hope that these works continue to travel and be exhibited. A large collection of Susie's works were gifted to the Albany Institute of History and Art. And so they received a gift of a vast collection of sketches, drawings, and paintings. And so, right, hopefully this is a wonderful example of when these go into public collections that they'll be shown on a more regular basis.
The next question is where will this exhibition go next?
So once it comes down from the New Britain Museum of American Art on the 31st, it will travel to Wausau, Wisconsin, to the Woodson Museum. And it will be there from May till August, and that's its third and final venue. When a lot of works come from private collectors, they want their works back. We have one painting that isn't traveling onto Wisconsin. A collector had said, I have this giant void in my living room and I want to fill it back with Susie Barstow. So it has one more stop along the way, but it lives on in terms of, right, the monograph and the exhibition catalog. And hopefully her works will be asked to be included in future exhibitions on landscape painting.
And we have one last question. What is it about Barstow's work that means the most to you? What do you find the most remarkable, and what are you most fascinated with?
Oh, that's such a wonderful question to end on. It's a hard question too. I will say that this project for me originated during the pandemic when we were sitting alone in our, rooms, our homes. For myself, right, I was staring into the corner of the wall for hours on end. And once this project began, and I had the benefit of one, reaching out to Barstow family descendants and working with them, and they sent me wonderful letters in the mail. Before we could get out and about, before I could travel and do archival work, I fell in love with her. Reading, there was a packet of 80 some odd letters that she wrote when she was traveling through Europe. And I did. I just every morning I woke up and I was so excited to learn, where is she now? What will she be doing? They were incredible things, like she went to Pompeii and she writes how she had to continuously move her feet because the soles of her shoes were melting because it was an active volcano at the time. And she writes how she cooked eggs in one of the little crevices of the volcano to have her breakfast. She was this incredibly stalwart and determined individual. And for me, I found myself so inspired by her that she truly was, by all accounts, so joyful. She loved her life. She loved her colleagues. She loved painting. She loved being in nature. She was always curious. And I think those were some of the best lessons for me that I learned. One, to allow serendipity to move you in places you could never possibly imagine, and to always remain curious and to say yes to every opportunity and see where it takes you. That's something that I certainly take away from her. And the paintings themselves are glorious, and they're immersive and they're intimate. And I think standing in front of them, you get the sense of true admiration for nature and a real sense um, of the American landscape. She was enamored of this, right? When she travels to Europe and she talks about wanting to find scenes as beautiful as the Catskill Woods, right? There's something so incredible about the landscapes, specifically that is around us in the Northeast corridor. That's just inspiring. So I think I'll leave it with that, but I could go on and on and on about her. I think she's just a tremendous individual.
Thank you, Dr. Siegel, and thank you for this wonderful talk today. And thank you, everyone, for joining us. I hope you guys have a great rest of your day.
Thank you. Thank you, everyone. Thank you so much for attending. Be well.